a little bit.
Cool.
All right, here we go. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to interrupt you.
I'm going to get my notebook out.
You're live now.
Okay. All right, so hi everybody. This is Caleb with CK Studios. And so I guess tonight we're going to kind of continue on with our discussion about blending. On Monday we talked a lot about, we actually kind of got sidetracked into non-metallic metals. But the theory still stays the same as how we're going to blend. We kind of talked about color transitions and how to keep your blend smooth by kind of trying to shorten up some of the transitions. So we kind of went over the very basics of what blending is, how to develop your blending skills. We talked about doing things like wet blending, spit blending, and what was on the two-brush blending. We kind of talked about that a little bit. And all of those skills are the blending techniques that seem to be the easiest to pick up on. But they need a lot of refinement to get really good. Two-brush blending, it is a technique that, when mastered, is really, really good. But you'll notice the other blend techniques that I was teaching, especially spit blending and just plain wet blending, are usually kind of a bulk up type of style of blending. We talked about that with sketching a little bit and how we're going to define our shapes and where light's going to hit and stuff like that, and then we're going to work on, from that point, we're going to work on blending across that. So tonight I have a couple of models again that I brought in. We can kind of look at the non-metallics a little bit again, but mainly I wanted to kind of focus on some more of the refining techniques. We're ready to start getting into that mid-level blending and maybe even into finish level blending. So we'll kind of talk about that more tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and switch cameras now, and we'll go over to my my camera that I've got my model under. Okay, so here I have one of the Sigmarites. Here's the model that we worked on last night, or the other night here. And you can see how a lot of the areas are bulked in, but they're not super fine here where I'm kind of pointing the brush to. You can see that we've kind of bulked in colors. I kind of defined where my points of light are going to be, but now I need to start to smooth that out. So I'm going to start doing some more mid-tone, some of that mid-level blending. Myself personally, after I get done with that bulk up blending, you know, we use a lot of two-brush blending and stuff like that to do kind of that bulk up work. Now I'm going to start doing some refining. So right now I'll kind of focus on the chest here. And I'll do two different techniques. The first one again is spit blending, but now I'm going to work on kind of thinning my paints a little bit more. Before we were putting on our paints pretty thick. Now you can see on my brush, my paint is a little bit thinner now. I've watered it down a bit. It's probably maybe half the consistency, or half the consistency of what you get out of a bottle. I don't want it super runny. You'll notice when I put it on that paper here. It still has opacity to it, but it's not super light. I want it to be slightly transparent. Not super transparent, but just slightly transparent. So I'm going to go ahead and load my brush again. So that's a little bit too much paint. So right there, I have about how much paint I want to do. And I'm going to apply again. I'm going to keep the tip of my brush towards the highlight because I'm working with a lighter color than my shadow. And I'm just going to lay that in. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to clear my brush. You notice I took a lot of the paint off my brush. And now I'm just going to really soften that transition point, that edge. I'm constantly working the brush more towards the highlight away from the shadow. So right here we're starting to get kind of like a nice mid-tone that's going to transfer from our highlight area here into our mid-tone area here. Again, this is that mid-level blending, so it's not going to be silky smooth yet. We're still going to have a little bit of rough area. And as you can see, when the paint's starting to dry, you can still see it's a little rough. I'm going to have to go back and forth a few times with both my mid-tone color and that base color, which for this model I chose is a nice dark color. I'm going to come in and I'm going to do the same thing. Again, I applied that nice shadow color, and I'm going to lay it right over the top of what I just laid down because it's going to help kind of smooth out that chalkiness. And then again, I can take that highlight color, and we'll do this back and forth a few times. You'll notice as I'm working that I'm going to do this until I really get the buildup that I like, and excuse me, the color transition that I like. So I might walk this thing back and forth about 5 or 6 times. Each time I'm going to try to get just a little more thinner with my paint. The closer to a glaze that I get, the better, but I still want to be able to build up paint. If I just do this with glazes, I'll be here all night just on this chess piece trying to catch the colors because it just won't build up. But you'll notice as I walk the paint back and forth, I am starting to get a nice buildup of paint. So I'm not quite a glaze, but I'm still watered down quite a bit. So now you can see that I'm starting to get nice transition, nice movement. And I'll move this model back and forth as I'm glazing it. I'll kind of roll it because I want to see where the light's catching and if I'm getting some little points. Like right here, you notice I got a little bit of extra paint that's kind of built up, maybe an errant brush stroke or something. So I'm going to have to fix that. So I'll just go in again with that shadow color, that darker mid-tone, and I'm just going to kind of heavy-handedly erase that edge, and then just again soften just the edge of it. As I come towards the shadow, I lift my brush, and that's going to push more of that paint into that shadow. So now I can come back in and work the highlight. Now I'm coming up a little higher than I was earlier because I want to really establish that opacity right up there to create that movement. Now I can come back in with my next color up. And again, the trick to super smooth blending is having very little color change in your transition. We're going to do a lot of transitions with color that's not too much different than the color I just laid. If we can keep it to that, it's always going to give us a lot smoother blends than if I paint from pot to pot. If I try to just go with the colors that I have laid out, with my pot to pot colors, here's the 3 colors that I'm working with. If I try to paint from this color to this color to this color, my blends are always going to be a little rough, a little chalky. There's no real way around that. I mean, there's some cheats that we can do, like the 2-brush blending, stuff like that. But for the most part, we don't really want to paint from pot to pot. We want to make sure that we're transitioning with a whole lot of different color changes. We might go from our shadow color to our mid-tone color, and it'll be like 75% shadow color, 25% mid-tone. And then our next step will probably be like, a 50-50. And the next step after that might be a 25% shadow, 75% mid-tone. So we really want to make sure that we got those steps. If we don't put those steps in, our paint will become chalky and bulky. And that's what we want to avoid.
Are you using a wet palette when you are
I
making
am.
your Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I guess I'm not going to get into really how a wet palette works or anything like that tonight. You can do this with almost any style of blending and any paint. If you're wet blending or something like that, a wet palette isn't going to be quite as effective for you. But if you're doing a lot of the glazing or like the spit blending style that I like, a wet palette is almost a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll just go in here and I'll kind of just work these colors back and forth until I kind of get where I want that blend to be. And sometimes you'll even have to walk like here. I was starting to get that shadow color was getting really chalky, so I had to bring that mid-tone in. So I ended up painting all the way into my shadow, and that's not a problem. We'll do that. I'll do that quite a bit. What it'll do is it'll just help soften those transitions even more. So don't feel that you're working backwards when you do this, because you'll see a lot of the painters, they will work back and forth constantly, and they'll go back and forth 20, 30 times maybe, just chasing that color until they really get that blend that they want. So I mean, that's getting a lot closer right there. I'm kind of happy with where that's starting to go. So now I want to go in and start working my actual highlight color in. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to start my next step. I do like, when I do these steps, I like to come in and do that sketch again, and I'll redefine just the highest edge of my highlight. The reason I do that is I like to bulk. It's a personal style that I like. Sometimes it might lead to a little chalkiness in my paint, but it's just, I don't know. Once I can see the light and establish where the light's going to be, it seems like it's a lot easier for me to start to do the transitions between them. Earlier, we talked about that sketching. I guess this model's a little bit better for sketching. You can really see the sketching here, how bright the highlights are and the shadows are. I really kind of pushed them to see exactly where the light's going to hit, and then I'll come back and define it better later on.
Mm-hmm.
So with my highlight, I kind of went in with almost that pure white color, and now I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm going to start to feather these out. And I'm still just using that wet blending technique, or that spit blending technique. That's just the technique that I like to use when I'm at this stage in my models. I can move the paint around a little more, and it's a little more forgiving for me. I'm reestablishing this highlight here because I want to see how high this point needs to be to not compete with this point there, if that makes sense. I just put a big errant paint smudge right in that shadow right there. We kind of want to avoid doing that too, because this will change how your highlights are going to look. So once you establish your shadows, if you make a mistake, try to go back and fix that. Don't leave it, because it will change how everything looks in there. So now, we'll reestablish this. Man, I keep getting that brush right into that recess. It's irritating. But anyways, that happens. I mean, it happens to everybody. So once I kind of have that established and I know where I want to be with that chest piece, I'm going to let this make sure it's fully dry and stuff. I don't want to start my next technique unless this is fully dry. So usually I'll move to a next section of the model and I'll start working on another area and start building that area up until I'm at the point where I know that that's fully dry. So this is pretty good right here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and I'm going to actually do some glazes. I'll take this little piece of paper and show you guys kind of how I prep my paint for the glaze. So it's not quite a glaze per se, like the French style, when they make a glaze, I mean their paint is like
Mostly water.
I guess you guys can't see that I'm right slightly off the camera. Their glaze is like this right here, where you can just barely see that blue.
Mm-hmm.
My glaze is actually going to be about like that. I don't need it super, super thin, because it'll take me all night to do these color changes. I don't want to sit there and do that color change. So what I did is I took that mid-tone color, and I watered it down quite a bit until it's to that glaze that I want. And now I'm going to take, and I'm going to be careful not to hit my highlight, but I'm going to start just below my highlight, and I'm just going to sheet it all the way across. And then you'll notice that I pushed the paint this way, and then I grabbed it and pulled it back up. I don't want that line of paint back here settling. I just want to kind of coat over that. And now I pulled it back up, and I was careful not to hit that highlight, because that highlight, it'll mute that highlight. Like I'll do it up here. If I hit that glaze and I hit the whole thing, you can see I lost that highlight. That might not be a bad thing. Sometimes you might want to chase it further than your normal highlight would be, and then do these glazes over the top to just unify everything. I've done that technique before, but for here I want that to stay nice and vibrant, so I really tried to avoid that. Now once that paint dries, I'm going to do another glaze, but I'm going to do it with that shadow color now, that darker, what is that, incubi darkness. So once I have this established and it's nice and kind of the density I want, I'm going to start just a little bit into that mid-tone. And then here I am actually lifting at the end because I can deposit that paint now in the shadow. It's not going to hurt anything to deposit it there. So I just kind of work this back and forth. I'll let that dry. I'm not going to touch it again. I need to make sure that it dries all the way before I do anything else, because if I come back and try to add another layer, I'll pick up some of the paint that's not quite dried and it'll create these edges, and you'll notice those edges. So go ahead.
I was going to say, I think that's one of my problems is I keep going back into it and then I get what looks like little spots or little... I'm too impatient and I don't let it dry fast.
Yeah, you have to let it dry. Almost with any of the blending techniques, you have to let it dry. So again, I'm going to grab that shadow color again, and I work just a little bit higher up this time. And it's really nice and transparent what I'm using. So as you see, it's starting to move. You can see that glaze on there, and as it dries, it'll really start to unify everything and pull everything together. How does the camera look on that, or how does the picture look on that camera?
Pretty crisp to me.
Is that
Looks
blue
good.
kind of washing out?
I can see all your washes.
Let's see something. How does that look on white?
That looks dark. It looks nice. I mean, I think the highlight shows up better.
Mm-hmm.
Does it overexpose?
No.
No?
I don't think so.
I'm just trying to decide if I should paint on white or if I should paint on a darker color.
Do you have black?
I don't have black here. Let's see. Do I have something that's black? Yeah, I do. Hold on one second. How does that look? Let's see how the camera focuses on black.
It's very crisp.
Yeah, the camera still. It zooms so fast. The zoom speed is so fast that it's really hard to. I need to figure out the manual focus on this.
Ooh, wait, there.
You can really see the detail on that model now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Does it seem like painting on black is a little better?
Yeah.
I think so, especially now that you got it focused.
Mm-hmm.
Looks really cool.
Mm-hmm.
You have only been using 3 colors?
Yes.
Wow.
All of my blends will. I rarely use more than 3 colors in any color transition. I'll pick a highlight, I'll pick a mid-tone, and I'll pick a shadow, unless I need some color nuance to it. So if I'm going to add color nuance, that's kind of in the final stages. So let's see once we get this chest done. So I still have just a little bit of an edge right here. I don't know if you guys can see that in the camera. I still have a little bit of an edge right there that's still kind of arguing with me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to that midpoint, and I'm going to mix a little bit of my shadow with a little bit of my mid-tone. And this way I'm not fighting it. I can try to glaze my way through that, but I'll be fighting it. So the easier way is to find the color that's the transition there, and just kind of come in here, and I'm just going to lay it in. I'm going to kind of move it around in circles until it's erased that edge. Because what happened is it created a little edge of paint that I didn't quite catch. So my glazes are always going to catch on that, and they're always going to leave just a little bit of a tide mark there. But if I can just erase it with some little dots and stuff, once that's dry, now I can come back in with that next color up.
And you use the mid-tone to do the dots,
A
right?
mid-tone with some shadow in it.
Okay.
And once I was able to hit that, now you'll notice that that's starting to erase. And then I'll just do that same thing again what I was doing, where I'll just go back and forth and chase this. And I'm using that spit blending again. I'm not doing my glazes. And that's what'll happen is sometimes you'll glaze in and you'll just see some things that you don't like. And so I'll come back in and I'll do that spit blend again. And I'm just real gentle. I don't have a lot of paint on my brush. You notice my brush doesn't have very much paint on it at all. I'm just kind of moving that paint around on there.
Caleb, for people that weren't here on Monday or didn't get to see it, will you explain what you mean by spit blending?
All spit blending is what I'll do is I'll come in and I'll lay some paint down on the model like this right here. You can see how much paint is on my brush. I'll come in and I'll lay that paint down like this, and I'll paint the surface I'm going to paint, and then I'm going to come and I'll either rinse my brush in water, or I'll actually come in and just kind of lick the paint off. Now you'll notice my brush doesn't really have much paint on it. Now what I can do is start to grab this paint, and I'll pick it up. Now you see how my brush loaded with paint? My brush is loaded with paint. I'll clear it again. Now I have no paint. I'll come in and grab a little more off, erase it again, until I have that nice transition point. And that's all spit blending is. Spit blending is just a reduction style blending. You're just you're applying paint and then you're reducing some of that paint on there. The reason spit works so well, and I know that it's kind of gross. That's where the whole idea of paint eaters, paint lickers, brush lickers came from. Is actually that style of reduction painting. One, you can control how much moisture is on your brush by putting it in your mouth. You get a feel for that. You can still do the same thing by dipping your paint in water and then going on a paper towel and just dabbing it until you know that you have as much water as you want or as much paint as you want on your brush. But a lot of people will just do it with their mouth. So you can tell what that is. The other thing is that the spit tends to dry just slightly slower than water. So it'll allow you just a little bit more time with your brush. So once I'm pretty happy with that mid-tone blend, and that looks pretty good right there. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I can go ahead and start. I guess I can't turn that any further. Now I'm going to go in and start to do like my final blends, and this is how I'm just going to really tie everything in. And I'm going to do those really wet glazes that I was doing earlier, and I'm just going to be really careful not to walk over everything, but I want to do just some unifying color. So I have, oops, got a little white in that one. My palette's a little unorganized and messy right now, so this helps to have a nice kind of clean, organized palette, not a Alfonso palette.
Yeah.
For this style. So what I'll do is just take that shadow, and I'm going over almost everything, just lightly avoiding touching that highlight. So now you can see I have a really nice transition now. It's super smooth. It just took and tied everything together. So you'll work a surface back and forth a few times, and that's going to allow that nice surface. So now as that model moves, you can see we don't have those hard edges that the light's catching. Everything's moving nice and smooth over the model. So I'm pretty happy with that. Now what I can do is kind of like what I was telling you, Shoshi, is we'll add another color in to create some depth or some vibrance. Remember how in Alfonso's class he talked about how red is like the color of life and stuff?
Yeah.
When you can go in with these complementary color into something like this, especially this really blue and black, I'm going to take some pure red. So you'll notice on my palette, I mean, that's pure red right here. I have some pure red. I'm going to take that, I'm going to turn that into that same glaze like what I just did with the shadow. I'm going to grab that red, and I'm just going to lightly brush it into the shadow, and I'm going to let it build up in those shadows just a little bit, like right in here and stuff. I'll glaze that red in and let that dry. You're probably not really picking up too much on the camera with it. Let's see.
Glaze into the shadow.
Yeah, I mean, you can kind of see it a little bit. You see how it's starting to give just a slight purple tint to it?
Yeah.
I'll glaze in that red, and I'll just let that red settle. I want to be careful not to hit the mid-tone point, because if I hit this mid-tone point right here with it, it's going to be very red. But as long as I keep it into that shadow, it's really going to help create some more depth in that shadow. And then once that's dry, I'll take my shadow color again, and I'm going to go with a really, really light glaze now. This is going to be like a French blend glaze. I mean, it's super, super watered down. I'm going to go right over the top of it again. And what that's going to do is it's going to lock that red in there. It's going to lock that red with just a touch of blue over the top of it. It's going to create depth and vibrancy. So now that I have a lot more color in there in that transition. This is really good when you're working with blacks. I like that Raven Guard Captain that I did for Games Day. All the shadows have reds and greens in them, and they're just these really light glazes, and they just create so much more depth and vibrancy because black is going to reflect those type of colors. And even though the model is a light blue greenish color, it's still going to have that black that's going to be in the deepest recesses is still going to have it's going to envelop all of the colors of the spectrum. So no matter where you're at, you're still going to have slight aspects of red and browns and yellows and blues and all that stuff. So that black needs to absorb that. So that's where we go in and just put those little color nuances in. The other place that red really works well and stuff like that is when you're doing skin tones. You know, that's like Ben's style of painting when he's doing faces. He goes in that same way and just glazes in these really nice, vibrant, pure reds and pure blues and stuff like that into the model. And then he'll come over and hit it with some skin tones after it's all dry. And just the vibrancy that it creates is so nice. It really creates depth and that slight translucency that skin has. It's a really good way to develop stuff like that. So that's kind of one of my styles of blending that I really like is just that spit blending with a glaze on top. Another style that I really like is, I don't know what the name of it is. It's just kind of a technique that I've worked on. I thought that this is what Ben was doing when he was talking about the wet on wet, and what Ben was actually doing was go ahead.
Kind of a technique that I've worked on. I thought that this is what Ben was doing when he was talking about the wet on wet, and what Ben was actually doing was kind of a technique that I've worked on.
Jeremy, can you type your question into the chat window because we couldn't hear you? I'll watch for it.
Okay, so the next technique that I use a lot is I thought this was the style of wet on wet blending, but I guess it's not. I was kind of corrected. So I don't know what to call it, but what I like to do is I'll come in and I'm just gonna have a brush with some water on it, just a little bit of water, not much, and I'm gonna apply a nice little film of water over the surface I'm gonna blend. As soon as that surface is applied, I can take that color and I'll put that color in, and now you'll notice I can move this color around. It's never stationary. I can pick it up and pull it. I can pull it up here. I can move it down. Here, I'll add a little dark so you can see the dark. I'll put some dark in here. I can constantly just move this around. I can pull the dark way up here. I can erase it. I can bring it all the way back down here. I can pull it in and move it back and forth. And as long as that surface stays wet, I can move the paint around. I can take anywhere I want, and I can just slowly adjust the translucency. Once I get it set to where I want to be, I'm going to stop. I don't want to touch it again, because if I come in and touch it, the wet spots will peel up, the dry spots will stick. So what I can do is wait until it's fully dry, and then I'll apply another little surface of water over the top, just lightly, and then I can take my highlight color, lay it in there, and do the same thing. You'll really notice with the highlight color. See how I can just pull it around? I can pick it up. I can move it back and forth. This works really good for creating hard edges. Like I want that really nice hard edge along that chest piece. That paint will just constantly move, and I can just constantly play with it and adjust it until I just get the paint where I want it to be. Once I have it where I want it to be, I can stop. I'll let it dry. I won't come back on it again until it's fully dried.
Is this a technique that you got to be more careful about tide marks with?
You just need to make sure that the paint is exactly where you want it when you leave the brush. The other thing is you want to make sure that it's not drying while you're still trying to move it.
Yeah.
If it's dried and you move it, it's going to give those tide marks. Because what's happening is that the pigments are all settling, and they're going to settle in a nice flat blanket. And if I come in and pick the centers out of that blanket, it's going to leave all the pigments around the edges, but I pulled the stuff out of the center. So that'll create tide marks there. This isn't wet enough, like a glaze, to where it will dry with tide marks. The paint's still relatively dense, but the trick is that I have a wet surface below it. I'm not really thinning my paints. They're going to thin on the surface because of the water that's on the surface. So right now you can see that there's that glaze of water. I can just take that next color and apply it. And as long as that surface stays wet, I can just drag it around and place it where I want. This is a really fast technique when you want to do that mid-tone type sketching blending that I was talking about. It won't work for your initial sketches because your paint will it'll move too much on you. For my initial sketch, I like to be kind of heavy with my paint. But then in this mid-tone, this will really create some nice vibrancy. You can really establish paint relatively fast. With this technique, if I were to water this whole shoulder pad down, I can move this paint in 6 different directions and find the highlights here, find the highlights here, find the highlights here, move them around, let it dry, and then I can come back. It's going to really speed up your painting. But again, it won't be a finished technique. As soon as I get the paint established where I want it, so I'll get that surface wet again. Put just a little bit more of this mid-tone in here. Once I have that set to where I like it, once I have that color set to where I like it, I'll do the same thing that I did before. Once everything's set in, I'm going to start my glazes again. So I'll come in with really light glazes, especially the shadow. This one I kind of erased some of my shadow. So I'll come back in with that nice thin glaze and re-establish that shadow. So now I'll go back in and I'll work a couple glazes back and forth until I get that blend exactly where I want it to be. So it's going to be the same finishing technique as I did on the other one. Just in between I did that wet on wet. Now I'll show you what happens if you don't have that surface wet. So here I'll lay the paint with, well, it's not going to work on that. What can I mess up? Well, I'll just do it on this shield here. I don't think it'll mess it up too bad. Here I wet the surface down.
Can you move it up a little bit? There we go. Thank you.
Okay, I wet the surface down, and now I'm going to apply that highlight color that I want. And you can see I can really move that paint around. See how I'm picking it up and moving it back and forth, and I'm just going to really establish it along the edge of this shield. And then I'll let it dry. Now, if I try the same thing over here without a wet surface, as soon as I lay that paint in and I start to try to move it around, see how it's hooking and the paint doesn't want to flow with me. It wants to establish itself. It wants to bond to the surface. So that technique won't work if it's not wet. Now, as I move it now, you'll notice it's starting to create those hard edges because that paint is sticking and it's drying. And as I try to go across it, I can't get it to move where I want it to move. So if we just keep that surface nice and wet, like that, and then put that paint in, now I can move that paint all over. I can place it kind of wherever I want. Get that surface wet. You can see I don't even have to be super clean with it either. I can really just blob that paint on and then just feather it around. That's why I was talking about how you can really establish super hard edges by just rolling that paint along that surface. It wants to come off the end of the brush, you know, and then as it dries, it's just like bam. And then, I mean, that's super fast. You've established super fast shadows, super fast highlights. It's a really nice technique. I really like it on swords. You know that super thin black line that you have to have right at the very edge of the sword? It's so easy to do with this. I don't have a model with a sword prep right now. I would show you guys real quick. In my blending class, I make sure that there's a model with a sword to do that hard edge. Well, you know what? I could do it on this hammer right here. I'll get it wet like this. And then I want to put a black edge right alongside that highlighted edge. Make sure that surface is nice and wet. I'm going to grab some black, and I'm just going to throw the black on there. And now I can just slowly work that back and forth.
It's so satisfying.
And you can see how hard of an edge you can create with that black. Well, I guess that wasn't right there. See how hard that black line is? And that's right next to that white highlight. If I try to do that freehand, I have to come in and try to perfectly paint a black line, and that's super hard. You know, it looks dingy, stuff like that. Or I can take that wet surface and just slowly transition that black, move it back and forth, and it's constantly rolling that paint towards the tip of the brush. You'll notice that black line establishes.
Yeah.
So that's a really good technique to have. I like doing that technique. Those are probably like the two that I use the most, is that spit blending style or this kind of wet on wet style. The last one is one that I'm still really struggling with. I'm kind of learning it. Is the loaded brush technique. The biggest mistake I found out when I was doing the loaded brush technique is, one, you can't use Raphael's for it. It was the weirdest thing, you know. Me and Ben are painting, and he's just like, man, it's so. He'd do it, and then I'd do it, and I couldn't get it to work, and I was really frustrated. And we finally figured out these barrels are so big. Whoops. These barrels are so big that they just absorb too much water, and it makes you really fight the paint. And Ben does all of his with the Winsor Newton brushes. So here, you know, you can see here's a Broken Toes, which is pretty much a Winsor Newton clone. You can see the barrel's much smaller. The bristles are a lot thinner, but they're just as long. So I'm not going to absorb so much paint, which is good. Now my first layer of paint that I'm going to load the brush with needs to be thinned a little bit. You don't want it to be pure color. And I'm going to load about halfway up the brush. Too dry. I'm going to load about halfway up the brush. So if you see here my brush, I'm about halfway up it. Now as I apply this paint, you'll notice it's slightly thin. See how thin it is? So we don't want super opaque paint on there, super thick paint. We want to thin it just a little bit.
Using a lot more paint than you did in the other techniques, right?
Yes, you're gonna load like a good half of that brush, maybe a little bit more.
Okay.
Okay. So this is the trick: is that if this paint is nice and thin, our next paint is going to be like out of the pot thick. So you'll notice right there. See the tip of my brush where I have that white color? That's pretty much out of the pot thick. So now I'm going to come into my model, and I'm just going to lay it down on the surface that I want, and I'm going to work my way. And as you work your way out, you'll notice that the paint starts to thin. Oh, that's hard to see. Those colors are very close to each other. I should do it with a darker color. You guys will see it a little better. So here's my brush loaded with a little bit darker color. And I'm going to come in and just grab just a little bit of the highlight, not a lot. So you can see I just have a little bit of the highlight color on the tip there. I'm going to apply it, and then as I work my way up, I can't go back. The biggest mistake I made was I would get a spot I didn't like, I'd go back in, and it would wash in the dark color. But now you can see that transition. See how that color just transitioned? It pretty much mixed on the model because the paint under the initial highlight color is a little wetter than the highlight color, so it wants to mix and it wants to be dominant with the bottom color. It's not going to be the color at the tip. It's not going to be the dominant color. So remember that when you're trying to do this technique, it's a lot easier to go from highlight to shadow because your shadow color is a little dominant. You can do it the opposite direction. Have your highlight color on the bottom with your shadow color on the top, but you'll never get pure highlight color out of it. It'll always be a mix. I haven't found a way to get pure highlight color out of it, but it'll still give you a really good transition. So once I set that, I'm not going to wash my brush. I'm going to leave the paint that I have on there. I'm just going to go back in and grab a little bit more of the highlight color, and then I can just establish that highlight even better.
Does it ever get stripy on you if it's too dry out or anything?
It will, and that's where I'm still learning the technique. Ben has got it down where with the movements of his brush, he saw me. I was kind of going like this. He'll come in and like right here, he'll establish this shadow like this, and he's always working like almost like in little diagonal, almost circles. It's really weird how he does it.
It's like rendering.
Right.
Caleb, can Ro ask a question?
Yes.
Go for it, Ro. You're not muted. Oh, we can't hear you, though. No, we still can't hear you. Do you have a mic on?
Okay. Well, I see his question. He says, can that be done on smaller sections? Yes. That is where this technique is really cool. Let's go to the top of this.
Really quick, what size brush do you like to use with this technique the most?
A 1 or 2. Everything I'm painting with is a 1 or 2. I rarely use anything smaller than that.
Okay.
So let's say that we're going to do this edge right here. So what I would do is I'll load that little bit brighter color because I'm going to really establish this highlight. So I load my brush with the color I need on it. And then I'm going to take my highlight, and I'm just going to be a lot thinner with my highlight. You'll notice there's very little highlight on there. I might even just take a little bit of it off. But now what I can do is I can take that highlight, and as I run the brush along this edge, you'll see the color changes. I went from white down into the blue. So I didn't have to erase this way. I could just run along an edge. This edge right here, I'll do the same thing. I can come in and just establish just a little bit of highlight. And as soon as that highlight gets through, the brush will run to the next color.
Love it.
So there's the highlight, and then as the brush runs, it goes down to the next color below it. So you can get these really nice edge transitions.
So fast.
Yeah, did you just level up your speed?
I did, yeah. I mean, if I can
Right.
keep myself patient and not go back into it.
Yeah, the biggest thing is not going back over and retouching it. Um, but yes, this technique works really well for smaller surfaces. Um, doing swords, the blades of swords, is really great with this technique. That's where I really like it. And then doing weird edges on Space Marines. Hold on one second. So here's one of the Emperor's Children, and I had these little transition points that I had to make that were super short. I mean, from the top of that knee to this uh, filigree piece is super short. Trying to get a reflection color transition in there, I had to do that with the wet blending here. That edge is just a quick wet blend and then off with the real dark shadow color. So, whoops. So you can see you can transition these really small, hard to get areas and do really quick transitions with them. The wet blend works really well with this. On this blade right here, man, that really washes out in the light. But that's all with that wet blend. So I started with that highlight color right here, and I just worked my way down with the shadow color. And then once I established the basics, all I had to do was come in and do my edge highlights, reestablish that bright spot just a touch, do a couple little points of light, and bam, you're done.
Wow.
So
He makes it sound so easy.
Yeah, bam, you're done, right?
Bada boom.
I mean, but that's
Caleb's technique's going to be the bam technique. Bam, you're done.
That's what happens. That's why you guys are seeing Ben do this stuff so quickly.
Because he's got that, yeah.
Right, and he's got it dialed. I mean, he is so good at it. When I was at his place, we did the face for that night bust.
Yeah.
We did that on, I want to say on Tuesday we painted that. He took Wednesday off from painting, and on Thursday he started the armor with that non-metallic armor that he did with the reflection points in it. He started out on Thursday, and by Saturday it was completed.
Wow.
You know, so I mean, he painted that in 3 days. It's just phenomenally amazing, and the speed with which he can paint. I mean, we did a face in like 3 hours, and I know he slowed down for me to show me all of his techniques. I bet you he could do the face on that bust, start to finish, probably in an hour.
Wow.
Just with that wet blending technique. Super effective technique.
Mm-hmm.
It does lend itself to just a little bit of chalkiness because of how thick the paint is.
Yeah.
That your glazes, if you want to go back to like the standard French type blending, you're going to struggle on that surface that you created with the wet blends because they won't be quite as smooth as like what we were doing with the spit blending type thing.
Can I ask you a quick question about blending and color? On some of the feedback I got on one of my warjacks for the contest that I was in, they said that it was too pastel and that there was a little bit of chalkiness to it, but they said that using too much of the white, I guess they liked that I had shaded panels from light to dark, but that there was, I guess, maybe too much white or something like that. I'm not sure.
Was your highlight color white?
I think I'd never. I didn't use white that often. I would use a light color though. Yeah, like ivory or something like that.
But very similar to the color that you were painting.
Probably.
Yeah, you're starting to get a little bit of desaturation.
Yeah.
There's two ways to change that. Is one, you can either introduce a new, like Aaron likes to call them, kicker colors. So what I would do is kind of like what I just showed you with that red. What I would do here, this model is very pastel. Those blues and where are we? There we are.
Yeah, it is pastel, isn't it?
It's very pastel because the blues and the whites are so complementary to each other. They're so similar that I'm going to start to fight that. So what I can do now, because I was using a blue like this,
Mm-hmm.
I'll zoom out just a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Whoop. Wrong way. Okay. So I'm using a blue like this. It's kind of that turquoise blue. This itself is going to lend itself to be a very pastel color because it's turquoise.
It's already
Turquoise,
saturated.
right. So what I'll do is I'll come in with um, a purpley blue,
Mm-hmm.
and I can just establish. So now I'm playing with some reds. Reds are going to be quite opposite to the greens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So think on the color wheel a little bit. If I start to add like a purple blue into that to that greenish blue,
Oh. Mm-hmm.
what'll happen is now it
Gets
starts to
rich.
get me into that tertiary color area,
Okay.
and it'll start to help soften that out. So then maybe my final highlight now, since that this is very still kind of soft, instead of using a blue white like this that I used for my highlight, I'll come in with a yellow white. And I'll just take and just put a little bit of this yellow white in there.
Hmm.
So now what's happened is not only did I use a complementary color on the color wheel, right? So I went to from a green blue to a red blue. So those are complementary on the color wheel. Now I came back in and not only did I change that and still stay blue, but now I went to a temperature change and I used a yellow white, which causes the temperature. It changes from that really cold to warm. That
Mm.
warm yellow is going to warm up this shadow that has the red in it.
Mm-hmm.
And now you won't have that turquoise look. It'll become more of that pastel look. It'll become more of a field of that.
Saturated.
Purple is a really great example of that. If you paint pure purples and just constantly brighten up with the same color, you're going to get a very pastel, super vibrant purple, but it's going to be very flat. It's going to be very plasticky looking, stuff like that. So if I can put variations of my highlights and my shadows in, there's some reds in here, there's some greens back here, there's some really deep blues right here. I'm constantly jumping around in the temperature range. It'll create more vibrancy for your colors.
Those are those things that make your brain explode.
Yes, it does.
But I understand. That helps a lot.
And once you can start grasping that, then you're on the road to doing what Alfonso's doing. I mean, my head still
Yeah, I know.
wants to pop thinking about what he was talking about. But I'm getting closer. I'm getting closer to it. So, I mean, those are the couple of blending techniques that I use most. I don't really use the other techniques. I don't like two-brush blending. It's just too bulky for me. It just feels inefficient for some reason. But I know other painters love it, so I'll never like downplay whatever styles. But I was talking about this with Kat earlier today. I learned to paint from Matthew, and Matthew is basically he taught French blending. And so everything I do is kind of related to the French blending style, and I have a tendency when I'm working to go back to that style. It's really hard for me to push away from that and do other techniques. But it affects, like what we were talking about. We're talking about sketching and the different styles of sketching, how DiPietro sketches and how Ben sketches and how I sketch. And all three of us have a very different technique and our steps for how we sketch. But then if you think about the styles of how we blend, you see why the sketching works for each person. So that was really interesting. It's definitely different styles, but it'll still get you that same goal.
Cool.
I don't know. So I guess I'll open it up to questions now about anything you guys want to talk about.
Yeah.
So one of the other feedbacks that I had gotten was that um, a loose watercolor look on a small miniature it reads as wrong. And so I wanted to know your opinion on, like, I'm talking competition minis. Do you think that there will ever be a way to do a loose, painting on a mini, or is it just like they said, it just doesn't look right? That's the
Un-
same noise they made.
unfortunately, when it comes to paint competition, blending is king.
Okay.
We have a tendency as judges when we look at pieces and you have to compare pieces and try to figure out where a piece belongs in the scheme of things from gold to bronze or whatever.
Yeah.
We have a tendency as a community, we have a tendency to look at a piece for its blending properties, for how clean it is. And I think that's a detriment to the hobby because it doesn't allow the expression that you're talking about. Did anybody get to see the anonymous bust that, God, I don't even know who did it, and he painted it in Van Gogh style?
That was
And it,
Anthony Rodriguez.
Yep.
okay.
That was
He did it in
brilliant.
pastel. Some
Fantastic.
Brilliant.
Beautiful piece. I absolutely loved it. I guarantee you, if that went into a competition in the U.S., it would get downplayed to a piece painted by, a piece painted by Jen Haley or Marika, which, they don't really have a tendency to paint texture. And
I think he entered that at Crystal Rush.
He
Didn't
did.
He did.
Yeah.
And that's what happens is people look at that and they instantly want to compare it to a super smooth blend, and that's what competitions have boiled down to, and that it's really hard to break. It's tough.
So should I just keep doing what I'm doing because it's still pretty? I mean,
Absolutely.
I have to do it.
I don't suggest that anybody change their paint style to win competitions, because if you start changing your paint style to win competitions, your models lose soul. They have no soul. They have no heart to them, and that's noticeable. And those painters tend to fizzle out if your total focus is painting to win competitions. Competitions are so subjective, and eventually you're going to become unsatisfied with the way competitions are run, and you'll lose your heart for painting. And that would suck. You know what I mean? But
yeah. People have been saying they like that watercolor look on my stuff that it shows, and it's like.
Sure. And that might just be an area where you just paint those for yourself and
Maybe.
Show those off and everything, because there's still absolute value and merit in that. It just might be something that doesn't get recognized in competitions, and be happy with that. I mean, still bring that stuff to competitions. Still show people what you're doing and let them see. It took me a long time to figure that one out, and Matthew told me that quite a few times. He said, "Quit painting for competition. Quit worrying about competitions and trying to change what you're painting and stuff like that." He says, "Find a model that grips you. Paint it to your style. Paint it 100%. Don't cheat it." I had a tendency to dilly-dally, and I'd find myself 2 nights before the event rushing to paint 3/4 of a model.
Yeah.
And so they're always unfinished anyways. You're always unhappy with it. You're frustrated. You know you could have done better. You're bummed out about the results. And Matthew just said, quit doing that. If the model's ready for competition, take it to competition. If it's not ready, then hold on to it, finish it, and take it to the next one.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about the results. Enjoy the journey. And that's huge. So
That's really huge.
Seth dealing with the same thing. His artistic ability is so unbelievable, and what he's doing is so awesome. But he's just not one of those painters that likes super perfect transition colors. He likes more of the effect of where the colors are, more than the perfect placement of colors.
Yeah.
And it's killing him because he gets so frustrated at these competitions, and a lot of judges just don't recognize that.
Now,
And
who was it you were saying about?
Seth Amsden,
Yeah, I feel like I'm in the same boat with him. Yeah.
yeah, and I mean, all I can say is just keep painting your style. Keep painting your style and enjoy your style. Don't worry about results of the competition. Because, I mean, what are you getting? A plastic trophy anyways?
Yeah.
The biggest kick I get out of competitions is being able to show my work to the other painters.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reason I'm going. That's the reason I do what I do. Is I like the camaraderie that we have, and I like to get feedback from painters that recognize different techniques and that recognize what's going on, instead of worrying about what a judge decided.
You know, a lot of the European painters, Spanish painters, were very complimentary to Anthony about his piece, but they also realized it was just not the style that's going to win any competitions.
Sure.
But they said
Europe is going more toward texture right now. They're leaning toward that.
And that's the thing, if everyone sticks to what they love doing, in about 5-6 years, the meta for competitions might change drastically.
Well, in 5 or 6 years, you're going to have different judges, and different judges are going to like different things. I mean, that's just the way it goes. For the longest time, non-metallic metals was like the big hot thing.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've heard competitions where people get downgraded for painting non-metallic metals.
It's true.
I don't know. I will never say yes or no to any one technique. I think you should have all your techniques. In some models, texture is very important. In other models, flawless blending is going to be very important. In some models, you need to paint non-metallic metals. That model calls for non-metallic metals. Other models, it needs to be true metallics because that piece calls for true metallics. So I always say just learn every technique you can, and that way you whatever model you're looking at, you can bring it to the vision that you see in your head for it.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
I really needed to hear that. I really, really did.
Okay, you're doing so well.
Yeah,
Paint what makes you happy.
Exactly. Paint what you enjoy painting. Don't worry about the competition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good.
I thought you absolutely nailed that troll Warcaster or whatever her name is, but I thought you nailed that. I was really like that one.
Thanks. Yeah, he was fun.
Right on.
These were great. I got a lot of notes.
That was very good, Caleb. Thank you. And it was good. We could see it on the camera too.
Yeah.
It looked pretty good.
Yeah, it looked good.
Great. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes me happy.
Now we have to work on your speaking voice.
Your camera looked great, but we've got to work on your skills.
Does the audio sound okay? Because it's that other camera.
Yeah.
It sounds good. You're
Even
fine.
when my head's
Sounded
down and
great.
painting, it doesn't get muted.
No, you're fine.
All right, perfect. Well, that makes me happy.
Yay. Good.
Do you ever use wet blending when you're doing terrain, like you're doing a base?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. Yes, it's such a speed saver for terrain. I love the color nuances and stuff.
I'm doing kind of a desert theme base right now, and I'm painting it up, and I'm like thinking to myself, this would be perfect for some wet blending in there, get different tones and that.
Yeah, I'll throw inks in. I'll do all kinds of crap.
We've got a couple of questions. They're more commentary, but you might be able to give some insight on this. Ernesto says that feathering is always a problem for him, and I think that plays off of, he says, Caleb, I always had issues with smooth transitions. I find more and more layering in small increments suits the way I paint. And that and feathering is always a problem for me. And Morgan followed that with, yeah, I'm trying to learn the feathering wet blend and wet and wet.
Okay.
Some of those things we went over, but can you give them any insight on that?
Yeah, that ultimately that is the secret to blending. Is the smaller the color transitions that you have, the smoother it will be, because you're still going to have brush strokes, and if you're trying to paint this color on top of this color, it's going to be talky. There's no way you're going to jump from this color to this color painting directly out of the pot. You need to transition. On a commission piece, I'll probably do 3 transitions between this color. I'll probably go base color. Well, actually, I guess it'd be 5 transitions. It'd be base color. It'd be 60% this, 30% this, and then I'll flip it the opposite way, and it'll be 60% this, 30% this, and then it'll be 100% this. So I guess that's 4 transitions and that would be for commission type work, just my above tabletop. Now, if I'm going to go into competition level, I am probably going to have 8 to 10 transitions from this color to this color. They're going to be very small. They're going to be very slow. It's going to be with a lot of that glaze blending, wet blending that I was kind of showing before. That's the way that you get the depth. And as you guys saw on that first piece that I did, it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. I can never just go from shadow to highlight and be done. I need to go shadow to midtone, back down to shadow, up to midtone, up to my mid-highlight, back to shadow, up. You know what I mean? I'm constantly walking about 3 or 4 tone values back and forth. That will really help with your feathering, is if you can walk those tones back and forth. Don't try to just go from shadow all the way to highlight, walk away from it, and say I'm done. You're going to walk those colors back and forth over each other. And that's what will really help with that transition that you're looking at.
Right on. Morgan says thank you. Any more questions for Caleb?
I came in late, but is this what I have to look forward to at Nova?
Am I doing a blending class at Nova?
I hope so. I signed up for it.
Yeah. I do believe you are.
I guess you are, Caleb.
This year has been so crazy for classes, and all the different places that I went to, I'm doing different classes on. So I've kind of lost count of which classes I'm teaching where. If we're doing a blending class, it's not going to be as in-depth as what I just did.
Okay.
The blending class I teach, it goes through like 6 different styles of blending. It goes from your basic 2-brush blending to wet blending to spit blending, and then I think we go into wet on wet. We go into loaded brush. There's one more. I'm trying to think of what the other one is. I'd have to look at my notes. But depending on how fast the class can go, I try to get 6 or 7 different techniques of blending, because everybody uses different techniques. What works for me might not work for somebody else. They might like a different style of blending. So I try to teach as many as I can, and then let you guys kind of play with them. The assumption is that if you're taking the blending class, you've already been interested in blending. You've probably watched a few videos on it. So I'm mainly there to correct mistakes. That's the big difference between a classroom and a DVD. A DVD is really good at teaching you a technique, but there's no interplay. There's no exchange. You can't go, well, hold on a minute. I don't quite understand that, because you're going to be talking to a TV. Whereas a classroom, you can try the different techniques. The 2 biggest mistakes I find is in wet blending. Everybody waters down their paints for wet blending. And wet blending, actually the paint needs to be like pretty much out of the pot thick. But But people don't do that because they hear wet blending. Oh, my paint needs to be wet. I'm going to add flow improver to it. I'm going to add this. I'm going to add that. Pretty soon your paint is running all over the place and you can't figure out why your blend's not working.
Right.
The other thing I find is with glazing is the exact opposite. You tell people to thin their paints, they go, okay, I thinned my paint. You're like, no, more. Okay, no, more. Okay, no, more. You know, so that's where that class really comes in nice, is it teaches, it helps fix mistakes. It helps fix mistakes. And I do teach the basics of it, but it helps if you come into it with a little bit of understanding for the techniques. You'll gain more out of that class.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Morgan has a couple more questions, and they're pretty good. We've got, do you have any exercises, etc., to practice blending, or just your normal practice stuff like what you have on camera currently? And there was another one up here. It disappeared.
For the noobs watching?
Oh, wait, no, there it is. For the noobs watching, what are the different types of blending methods?
In a way, I just kind of talked about that. Popular ones is like the two-brush blend. Two-brush blend is a very popular technique. Loaded brush is becoming a very popular technique. Spit blending is an age-old technique. A ton of people use that still. Glazing, wet blending, or wet on wet, which what I kind of showed you is a little different. What the normal wet on wet would be is where they'll come in with a color. And this is almost like just wet blending, but you're painting on top of each other. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to lay a color in. And I'm going to lay it in really thick, and I'm going to lay it in really fast. And then I'm going to come over right over that color with another color. And I'm just going to kind of work that color, but you have to be kind of quick with it. But as long as those colors stay wet, I can constantly go back and forth over them until I get that blend that I want. Oops.
Could you use some sort of retarder?
This helps with the retarder, yes. This technique really works well with the retarder. But all you're doing is you're kind of mixing the paint on the surface. It works really good with big areas. That's why I jumped on this shield with it. Space Marine shoulder pad, stuff like that, it works really well with. If it's finer detail, you're really going to struggle with that technique. It's not going to work for you because it's just too messy. It's too messy of a technique. The same with wet blending, where you're actually applying the two colors. You'll kind of apply one color here, and then the next color you'll apply here, and then you're going to go in and intermix those colors in the middle like this. That works good too, but it's not very effective for super small surfaces. If you want to paint that style, I suggest going to that loaded brush because you're going to do the same thing. Now I'll grab that color, grab my highlight, and then with loaded brush, I can do the same thing. So those are some of the different styles. Two brush blending is just where you apply paint and then you take a clean brush and you smooth the edges. So something kind of like this, where you're going to apply the paint and you'll take a clean brush, and almost like my spit blend, I'm just going to flatten and smooth those edges. But I like spit blending better, just because it's only one brush. It's not two brushes. It's more conductive for the way I paint. Now there is another style of two brush blending where they'll actually have two colors of paint. So you might have, your dark color here, and then your light color, and you'll actually kind of paint and mix them like this with two brushes. That's another style of two brush blending also. So there's so many different techniques out there, but ultimately they're all doing the same thing. Is you just want to soften the transition between colors. If you do smaller steps in color change, it's always easier to blend. So remember that no matter what style of blending you're using, shorten your transition color steps, and it'll work a lot better for you.
Wonderful. Ernesto's asking, what's the name of the technique involving dry brushing, like a series of 3 or 4 brushes almost dry and brushed into each other? Does that make sense?
Yeah, what I've seen is I don't even have a model prepared for that. You're going to need a bumpy surface for that, but what they'll do is they'll come in, and this will ruin your brush, is you're going to take that paint and you'll load your brush with paint like this. And then I'm going to stick them onto a rag and I'm going to kind of clear it. And then I'll just take and lightly brush the surface. So it's just a dry brush like this. But then while it's still kind of wet on my brush, I can take another color, grab it, and do the same thing. And I'm just going to work along the edge. So instead of getting right into where my highlight, I guess these aren't very different in colors. Hold on. You can't water your brush in. So that's a word right here. So I'll dry brush in a color like this. Okay, and then I'll come in with that darker color. And because it's not hitting all the surfaces, is my hand covering that so you guys can't see it? Think about that.
The camera's having a hard time focusing on it that far away.
Yeah, because I'm not covering all the surfaces, it's actually intermixing a little bit. You see how the darker color is kind of over the top of the lighter color? That's all that is. It looks really good on metallics, floor grading, the edges of vehicles, stuff like that. It looks really good. When you start putting it on a model, it's going to give it a really chalky look, and there's no way to get rid of that because you're just skipping the brush over the top of the model, and it's going to just paint little dots and little streaks. You're going to get a very chalky look to that. It works really good for like monster skin tones. What you'll see a lot of painters do is they'll base coat their model, they'll put all their shadows in, they'll wash it. They'll go over the top and they'll dry brush highlights, and it'll create all the cracks and crevices and wrinkles. And then once that dries, they'll come in and they'll throw a couple glazes right over the top of that. And bam, you're done, and your model skin looks so good. And that's super fast,
awesome.
Especially for big monsters. That works really well.
Can you talk or tell us anything about using oils in blending? Or is that just an entirely different subject?
I haven't played with them yet.
Okay.
I would love to. I would love to. I've heard a lot of great with them, but I have not. I'm scared to try them.
Okay, that's cool.
I haven't played with them yet.
And Ernesto says thank you, by the way.
Absolutely.
He says Joe had talked about that dry brush blending, but he totally forgot, and he uses it for units and whatnot also. Awesome. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay.
It's good stuff.
That was awesome. Thank you so much, Caleb.
Morgan's asking me, what are your thoughts on James Wappel shaded base coat method? I'm not sure exactly what that is.
He kind of like does multiple colors on. Go ahead.
I can kind of explain it. I'm still just learning it. I've downloaded his videos recently and been having conversations with him. Essentially, he uses a filbert brush with rather thick paint, and he blocks on color on the entire miniature, and goes through most of his gradients straight off the bat quite roughly, and then comes back because he does it. It's pretty much kind of a rough, wet blend on all of the surfaces, so that you get a full image of what the miniature is going to be, and then he comes back with multiple glazes to re-glaze and blend it all in together and smooth it all out.
Yep. That's What we call that is sketching. That's kind of what I've mentioned a few times in the class is it's just sketching. What we'll do is we'll go in and we'll bulk a model out. We'll go in and just paint the shadows in. I've sketched a little bit on this foot. If you'll see here, I'm just bulking colors in along the knee pad and stuff. That's all just bulk colors. I'm not being super clean. I'm not really worried about blending it. I'm just going to put my colors in. So now I'd be ready for like my next step. So I'll come in with my highlight color. And I'm not going to be super clean with it. I'm just going to bulk it. Just going to...
Can you zoom in a little bit on that, Caleb? If it'll let you.
Got too greedy.
There we go. Awesome. Thank you.
So here on this foot now, I now have two colors, but if you look really close, they're not very good. The colors aren't in very sharp. I'm just gonna bulk these colors in. I'm gonna come in and set here on this foot. You can really see it on this foot now. You see how I have those colors set? I'm just gonna do my next color along this thigh right here, right here, right there. I'm just bulking my colors in. Once my colors are bulked in, now I can come in with that spit blending style that I was talking about, and I'm going to start to soften these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be careful not to color the absolute highlight. I'm going to work around that highlight. Here, I just want to transition those edges. I just want to soften the edges. So I'm not actually touching the highlight side. I'm just transitioning. Here, I'm just going to softly soften those edges up. So that's kind of what he's doing, is he's just bulking in, and then he'll come back and glaze. And we call that sketching. I guess he calls it, what is it? Shaded base coat. It's all pretty much the same idea. The faster you can put paint down on the model, the quicker you're going to be in doing the rest of the painting. If we're sitting there and we're trying to glaze all these colors, if I tried to do all these steps in all glazes, it would be, this foot would take me a month. But if I can come in and bulk and use some of the other blending styles, that'd be really quick. Like here, I'll do a wet blend real fast, or I mean a loaded brush. And now I can really speed that transition up. Just a touch more highlight in there.
So with those, the sketch colors or bulking it in, do you normally do those like 3, 4 layers of different colors? Do you normally do them all wet so they blend a little bit, or do you normally do them where you let each one at least half dry before you come in with the next color that you're going to sketch in?
It just really depends on what I'm painting. A lot of times I like them wet to where they'll mix. I'll come in and I'll base coat like this, and then I'll just quickly grab that highlight, and my highlight color's kind of crapping out on me. I'll grab that highlight and then maybe take that base color again and just, you know, I've established it nice and quick to where it's not super clean, but you can definitely see where the light is. The benefit to this is that if I make any mistakes, I'm not 4 hours into the model and go, oh, that light isn't right. I don't like the placement. Once that's done, you can kind of take a look back, zoom back from the model a little bit and take a look at it and say, okay, does that light look right to me? Is that hitting in the right spot, or does it look like it's wrong? Like here, that point on that little pad is wrong, so I need to erase that. I can see that just by stepping back away from the model. Maybe create just a little more contrast right there with a dark. Things like that. It's going to allow you to really play with the light and color without wasting a lot of time. That's why I use sketching. Other painters might use it for other reasons. I even sketch with an airbrush when I'm doing my airbrushing. I'll go in and I'll sketch and bulk up these big colors, and then I'll come over the whole top of it with a glaze and erase everything because those colors are going to show through. That's the other point with I guess I could talk about too is when you're bulking up those colors, if you're doing say a red model, if you go all the way to pure yellow and put a really heavy yellow highlight in, and then you paint over it with those red glazes, it's going to be red, but the minute you come back with another yellow, it will instantly make that yellow more vibrant because there's that yellow underneath the red. The light wants to play through that red and catch some of that yellow. It'll reestablish that yellow when you paint that over the top. That helps with vibrancy of color. So not only does it help speed things up, but it'll really help with vibrancy of color too by sketching in different colors.
Well, thank you for that.
I think I call that the heart attack technique. I watched you do that, and I thought, "Oh my God, what'd you just do?" and then it popped after you started reapplying colors, and that was amazing, amazing, amazing. Does anybody else have any questions?
I could probably go on for hours with questions.
Does that also apply to complementary colors for use in, say, undershadows? Yes, it does. By bulking in a red and you sketch in that red in your shadow, and it's going to be a blue model. As soon as the blue goes over the top, the blue will take on a slightly purple tint to it. And the minute you reestablish a nice reddish blue into that shadow, you'll instantly, the red will be more dominant than the blue because it has a red undercoat on it. It's really good for that undercolor shadows. See, shadow. Say there's an eagle beak and I use blue for the undershadow. Exactly. In terms of making the blends, how valuable is using a digital photo to check the blends? You can. The problem with using a digital photo to check your blends, especially on your highlights, is cameras tend to overexpose white, and you might end up working on something that you really didn't need to work on. This camera right now, if you look at this hammer, it'll be a really good example of this. I'll zoom in on this camera, and there's this little point on this hammer that when we were working on it last night that I can only see in the camera and I cannot see it on the model. And you'll notice, you see that line right there? For some reason the camera picks that line up, but I cannot see that line on the figure. And it might be that I had an errant bright slash in there, and then when I went over the top of it with my mid-tone color, it's trying to bleed through, and I think the camera, with the way the light is reflecting and the camera picks it up, it's seeing that, but it's not there. If you look at the model in person, it's that edge is not there. I can't find that edge. So be careful when you're using a digital camera for that. What I do like the digital camera for is taking a black and white photo of your model, and it will help you check your tonal values. Sometimes we get lost in a model by using transitions based on color solely. I know for a long time that was how I differentiated different leathers, like on an orc or something, is I would paint each piece of leather a different color, a different brown to differentiate, and I didn't understand tonal values. So by going into black and white, it'll show you the tonal values and help you keep that composition of your model intact, and you'll know that your light focuses and your shadows are all right and stuff like that by going into black and white. That's a really good tool for that. Yeah, I think I just, who said that? Morgan said, I take photos and change saturation to full black and white. That tends to help spot issues.
Yeah, I mainly started doing that because I've got a group for colorblind people, and we've got this guy who's full black and white colorblind, yet from his miniatures you wouldn't tell, and his blends are absolutely perfect.
Because seeing tones, you'll be able to blend. A good friend of mine, Michael, is colorblind, and his blends are flawless. They're beautiful blends because he can see tones. He can see the tonal value. He just can't differentiate the colors. So as long as he has a recipe in front of him and the label for each color is on the pot, he can mix those colors and know that they're going to be complementary colors, or they're in that same color range. That he can just see the tonal values. That's what I would stress when you have colorblind students. I would stress them on learning tonal values and then just find their recipes. You can sit down and tell them the 3 green colors to use, and they'll use those 3 green colors for everything.
Yeah.
And they might know a blue shadow that they can use. They can't see that blue, but they can see the tonal value that blue is creating by putting it on the model.
Michael's one of our admins.
Yeah.
For the colorblind group.
Yeah, I mean, we're using a camera to do the same thing. I'll turn a lot of my models to black and white. My fawn bust, I don't know if you guys ever got a chance to see those black and white photos, but it really helps establish how black and white can really tell you what's going on with the model for tonal values, because tonal values is the most important thing in a model, is making sure that you have the right tonal values.
And that's a whole massive topic in of itself, really.
Right. I mean, yeah, it's light and composition. We did a little thing on light and composition earlier, right? I think there's a recording on
There's a
Hobby
recording
Hangout
of it, your first one.
we really talk about breaking the model down into spheres and understanding how light needs to react with the model. And then cheating light. We do that a lot. We do that a lot with models to cheat the light.
Yeah, I think I watched that video something like 7 or 8 times now, taking notes.
Yeah, that's very good.
Right on.
That's cool.
That's cool. Love to hear that.
I was actually going to watch it again today to take more notes and double check what I've written.
Cool.
Okay, well, I think I've talked enough.
Right on. So for everybody watching this, that's we've got viewers that are watching out there too. If you have any other questions, go ahead and post them up in the feed, because Caleb's really good about watching the feed. And so if you didn't have a chance to ask anything, go ahead and do that. And he'll probably get to that, I would think, in the next couple days, if nothing else. And look for this video on the Hobby Hangout channel on YouTube. It'll be there. Thank you so much, Caleb. You did a great job. This was a fantastic, fantastic session.
Thank you for having me on, Kat. I'm really liking this Hobby Hangout. I think this is such a great tool.
Very cool.
It really is. Good stuff. Good to see all of you guys. And I'm going to go ahead and leave this going, so if you guys want to just hobby and hang out, we'll go. But I'm going to stop the broadcast now. Thank you.